If getting organized to administer your state test totally overwhelms you, stay tuned. This is going to be part 1 of 3 of how I stay calm, cool, collected, and organized during my state test administration. Although your state may have different policies and procedures, this is just about getting organized in order to make sure that things flow smoothly. So my first tip for you, and I have my notes so I don't forget, is of course, read your manual. From state to state, it may vary. You may be testing paper pencil, you may be testing online, so you always want to make sure you read your manual. Tip number 2, you want to ask all the questions. Tip number 3, I highly advise, for the sake of organization, and especially if you're testing students you don't usually teach, you want to make sure that your desks are in rows. Now, not just in rows, but you want to make sure that your rows are short enough that you can access all students quickly, readily, and that they're all visible. Tip number 4, find your visibility spots for monitoring. Standing in the same spot is obviously something that's going to get very exhausting. I like having some of my spots standing, some of them seated, and somewhere I'm just walking around. Tip number 5, make sure that you have access to your student roll call form and that you know what materials your students should have for the day of the test. So make sure you have access to them, that they have batteries, that they're charged, and make sure you have them in your classroom, or that they'll be delivered the day of the test, or that you know exactly where to go pick up materials. I also recommend that you get to school early the day of testing. And I mean like extra early, so that you make sure you have everything you need. One of the things I really like to do, especially when I'm teaching students that I don't normally teach or work with, is make sure that I have my roll call sheet and I write each student's name on a little sticky note. Then, if you've watched part 1, you know that I like to have my desk in rows. And so I go down the desk and I'll do one student, skip a desk, one student, skip a desk. And this ensures that there's adequate spacing. If I have a very large group, I may have to use every single row, but you want to make sure that you seat a student between 2 students so that you don't have students that are parallel side by side. When we have student benchmarks earlier in the year, I like to train these students that I'll be testing to walk in and put their backpacks underneath a designated area or in a designated area. In my class, it was a table. So all backpacks would be pushed out of the way underneath the table. If students had any type of water, snacks that they might need, books that they wanted access to, or anything like that, they were to stay on the table, visible. So I would have a Sharpie on hand so that they could write their name on their water bottle. But I would have that on the table, so if they need a snack break during the testing administration, if that's permissible in your state, they would grab their snacks and exit the room. The only thing students are permitted to have is their sweater. Once testing starts, my students know they are not allowed to go to their backpack. To facilitate and not waste time passing out materials or supplies once your students are seated, I like to have a little drive-through station where as my students walk in, they're grabbing the essentials. Pencils, eraser, highlighter, the essentials. That's going to cut back some time in having to pass out each and every single one of those materials, or creating additional distractions with several student helpers up at the same time trying to distribute all these materials. To streamline the time that it takes me from when my students walk in to the time we begin testing, I also like taking row at the door. So as students walk in, I ask for their last name, first name, I ensure they're on my roster, and once I see that they're there, I count them present and they know exactly what to do, backpacks underneath their desk, and they grab their supplies as they walk in. The next suggestion that I have for you is do not deviate from your testing script. This is your first year ever administering any type of state test. You will get some sort of manual where you will read some instructions to your students. Make sure you read those verbatim. Next tip. Nothing leaves the room. Doesn't matter if it's scratch paper, doesn't matter if it's pencils from the testing site. You want to make sure that nothing leaves that room. So as students finish, you want to make sure you pick up their supplies, pick up the scratch paper, pick up anything they use so that you can either submit it to the testing coordinator to be shredded, or whatever the procedure is for your state test, for your campus, according to your testing manual. And this also includes any type of testing codes that were used to access an online test or anything of that nature. Next tip, double check everything. Make sure all booklets are accounted for, double count Scantrons. If you have a teacher portal that allows you to see who has submitted their state test, make sure that you double check that everyone has hit submit on their test. As always, make sure to follow the procedures set up by your state testing manual. And lastly, I want to encourage that for every benchmark that you have throughout the school year, practice with your students setting these expectations for after the test. If you do not take the time to give your students the options of what they can do once the test is done, believe me, they will think of their own. So I like to say you can go to sleep, you can sit in silence, or if your state allows students to read books after the test, that is all they will have access to doing. If you don't set those boundaries, students will start asking you if they can draw, if they can sit next to their neighbor, and so on. You want to make sure that this experience is as stress-free, calm, and organized as possible for everyone involved. I hope this was helpful. Comment below, what are your greatest tips for staying organized, calm, and collected during your state testing days?